Hello friends, Tattooed Biker here with you, and welcome back to Freakish Fridays. Tonight I'll be reading 3 emails from viewers who've had experiences or sightings of the elusive cryptid known as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Their reactions to seeing this being range from fascinated to sheer terror, and everywhere in between. So gear up for some true Bigfoot encounter stories, and let's ride to Sasquatch country. Number 1. Dear Tattooed Biker, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a herpetologist. I travel frequently into the North Georgia mountains, up into the Helen area, and the Chattahoochee National Forest. I was going there to observe some wildlife that I frequently study. This happened in September 2016. It was approximately 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and I was going to my usual sites, when I observed that there was no wildlife active. I didn't notice it at first, but I did later on, and as I was walking. I walked up to a ridge and I noticed there was something diagonal from me. It was on the ground and it wasn't moving. I was about 20 to 25 feet away. I moved towards it and it jumped up and spun around very quickly. I realized, that this was something very out of the ordinary. Something that I hadn't seen before. And it was sitting there, and it was staring at me, and some minutes had passed, and at this point in time, it was making a moaning growl or something. Or at least, it was making sounds close to that. That's the best way I know how to describe it. It was man-like. It was approximately 7.5 to 8 feet tall, and 4.5 feet from shoulder to shoulder. It was very large and bulky. Some might say it was ape-like, but in my opinion, due to my studying various wildlife, it wasn't anything close to being an ape. It was like a man. There was absolutely nothing ape about it, other than it being very muscular. The hands, the best I can describe the hands, are about a size 13 or 14, maybe even larger, as far as trying to fit a ring on it anyway. Very, very muscular. I can't stress this enough. You could see the whites of the eyes, unlike other creatures. They were squinted and aggressive. The forehead was not ape-like. It was more Homo sapien than ape. It did have full body hair, except for the hands and feet. There was even hair on the knees and the elbows. It had hair like a man. The teeth. I was able to observe the teeth as they were bared most of the time. The teeth were like a man's. They did have 3 or 4 canines, but they were worn and pretty nasty. I stood in front of this creature for a significant amount of time. I didn't know whether to run or to just stand there or do whatever. Definitely, this creature could easily outrun me. Like I was saying, the hands and the skin were tanned. They weren't black. I wouldn't even say dark brown. They were just tanned. It did have fingernails, human-like fingernails, and they didn't have blood on them. I was able to tell that. This was all happening, and I was observing its hands, and he was sizing me up. That's the best way I can describe it. It then picked up a log, and I was able to observe that he was most likely right-handed. I know this is going to be hard to believe, but it's true, and it chucked it in my general direction. Notice I said him. It did have male organs. I was able to observe that. No tail, and it walked upright. It had reddish-brown hair, and it was matted. I'm not 100% sure if it was due to the Georgia clay or if that was his actual hair color. I was able to observe that it was a mix of brown and red. After it chucked the log, at this point in time I started backing up slowly. It didn't charge me or try to beat me or anything like I was expecting. I was slowly backing up, and there was a strong stench that smelled sort of like body odor. Somewhat like a wet dog, but I'd say probably 100 times stronger. I was backing up, and this all happened within about 2 minutes. And I slowly started backing down the ridge, and eventually I got out of sight and I made a beeline back to where I came from. It was definitely real, Beyond a shadow of a doubt, it was what some might say was a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or whatever. It definitely wasn't a man. It wasn't a native creature that's seen every day. Someone might make their own decision about it, but that's all I gotta say. There wasn't much to compare it to, but I'd guess it weighed about 400 pounds. The forehead was sunken back and the shoulders were more forward. It didn't have a proper human posture. It was definitely leaning more forward than straight up. It's rare to see somebody that would be as muscular as that creature. It was exhibiting more caution, on the verge of aggression. The eyes, I was able to observe the eyes. They did have some downright fear, but there was definitely some aggressiveness there. The eyes were kept squinted. The breathing was rapid, and going by the noises the creature was making, it felt threatened. I just wanted to share my experience. Thanks for reading. Signed, Albert. Number 2. Hey TB, my experience took place in April of 1995. I was 25 years old, going to college in Yakima, Washington. I've been up there for about a year and a half. I love hunting and fishing, so going from Phoenix to Yakima was a huge rush during the summer. I was completely infatuated with Bigfoot at the time, so every time my neighbor and I would go out to the North Fork, my mother, with whom I was staying while I was in school, would tease me and say, "Are you going out to find your beast?" I would always jokingly reply, "Yep, this is the weekend I succeed." If only I knew just how much that I would regret making that statement. My friend and I arrived out in the woods at about 6:30 in the early evening. We drove up the old forestry road until we found a large area that was level and large enough where we could park his 1965 Ford two-wheel drive truck. We set up camp for the night and we cooked brats over the fire. After dinner, we sat on the tailgate just watching the fire and talking until about 11 p.m. It didn't take long for us both to fall asleep, being all ready for the morning hunt. At around 3:30 a.m., I woke up to a dead silence. It was so quiet that I figured there must be a black bear or a cougar really close by. It didn't take but a minute for me to realize that it was way too quiet for even a predator to be close. I couldn't even hear the creak anymore. I reached over and shook my friend's leg to wake him up. He rolled over and asked what my problem was, and I said, "Do you hear that?" And he snapped back, "I don't hear anything. Go to sleep." And I said, "Exactly, it's too quiet." He turned over and sat up and listened for a moment. Then he gave me a weird look. "That's what I'm trying to tell you," I whispered to him. Then, coming from the trees, you could hear footsteps. I said, "Do you hear that?" And my friend whispered, "Must be a bear." And I said, "Bears don't walk on two legs unless they're threatened or going after food above their heads. And that's too big to be any black bear around here, or anywhere else for that matter." The gravel on the road sounded like it was almost being crushed under its feet as it walked. And then we smelled it. It was like a garbage dump, mixed with the odor of death. We sat there quietly as it walked around the truck. Then the footsteps stopped on the driver's side of the truck bed. We could hear the sound of the cloth being torn above us. I looked up and there were fingers, human-like fingers, but about 4 times bigger than mine. It was tearing back the cloth. When it stopped pulling it back, a good 8 inches in all, I could see 2 glowing yellow eyes looking down through the hole at me. That was the exact moment that I really screwed the pooch. Without thinking, and still trying to tell myself that it's just a stupid black bear, I reached over, and in one smooth swing, I grabbed the closest fishing rod and followed through with the most power that I could muster. I hit it right across the bridge of its nose. Well, I broke that rod in half and sent it stumbling backwards. At that point, it let out this scream or roar that shook everything inside the back of that truck. I could even feel the vibration of my body as if I were standing next to an explosion. It was so loud that it left my ears ringing, and my friend actually soiled himself. Then we heard 2 fast, hard steps, and it felt like a semi-truck just smashed into the driver's side of his truck. Then, as if we were just a Tonka truck, the driver's side was lifted off the ground, and the truck was suddenly sliding toward the edge of the shoulder. I suddenly got this overpowering feeling of sadness, and I realized more than the pain of being hit in the face with a 1.5-inch round piece of wood. I started yelling at it, "I'm sorry, I'm so very sorry, but you scared us." Then the truck stopped sliding. At that moment, it dropped the truck back down on all 4 tires. And I said, "Look, we just came up here to bag a few squirrels. Then we're going to leave." I promised we would leave as soon as the sun came up. It then let out what almost sounded like a whimper, which for it was still pretty loud, and then we heard it walk back across the road. Within just a few minutes, all the forest sounds came back. Needless to say, we didn't poke our nose out from under that cloth until morning. We finally gathered enough courage to come out from under the truck once the sun came up. We saw that it had pushed the truck a good 3 feet toward the edge. You could clearly see the bent metal on the fender and running board, which it had grabbed with its hands. Since that encounter, my friend still won't talk about it, so it kind of helps me deal whenever I can to share my story. Thanks. Signed, Anonymous. Number 3. Hello, Biker. I've had a few experiences with what some would call a Bigfoot, and I'd like to share them with you and your listeners. I'm 54 years old now, and an avid hunter, trapper, and fisherman. When I was 12, we had a family visit to Muir Woods National Monument in California. I was obsessed with steelhead, and there was a stream full of them right next to the walking path. I left my family to get closer to the fish. I guess I was about 100 yards from my family when I rounded a bend in the stream. I climbed over a rock, and about 30 yards away a guy was squatted on the edge of the river. We locked eyes, and it seemed like he was trying to kill me with a stare. As he stood up, I couldn't believe how fast he moved. His hair was dark brown, and his face only had hair around the edges. He kept his eyes on me as he literally stepped across the creek. I saw grayish hair on his back and the muscles of a bodybuilder. The creek was like 20 feet across, and he literally cleared it with one hop. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. No one ever believed my story. Not my parents, my brother, or anyone that I've told for that matter. Jump forward to the year 2000. I was married by then and living in northern New Jersey. I shot a huge buck one morning early, and the arrow seemed a bit far back, and I decided to give him some time. This was November, and I was coaching football at the high school nearby. I went to the game with the intention of tracking the deer afterwards. We followed the blood trail about 150 yards to where the deer died. You know what the ground looks like when a full-killed deer expires. There was a 10-foot circle covered in blood and hair. The blood was like someone spilled a 5-gallon bucket of it, but there was no deer. The bears are huge here, but a bear would have chowed on that deer first, and then dragged it a distance and either hit it or left to come back. But there were no drag marks, no blood trail, nothing. But my carbon arrow was broken into 4 or 5 little pieces. During turkey season the following year, I was hunting behind my house every morning. There's about a square mile of private land there. I kept jumping what I thought was a bear on the edge of a swamp at the base of a steep bridge. It happened several times in the dark. Each time the bear would move up about 50 yards. It was always at first light, and I was hoping to hear the turkeys gobble on the roost. One morning I was late getting out, so I was creeping a little slower than usual. An owl was hooting as I walked. When I got near the area where I was jumping the bear, I heard someone running towards the ridge. It was the thump, thump, thump of a two-legged being. Their feet were hitting the ground, not the leaf shuffling a bear makes on the run. And then I saw it. It neared the top of the ridge, taking these huge strides. As it topped the ridge, all I could see was the same face staring at me from when I was 12 years old. I knew exactly what it was, and I haven't slept right since. At our camp, about 20 miles from my home, we had a deer taken from inside of a pickup truck with a cap on it. The T-handles of the cap were closed but not locked. Whatever took the deer put its hands on top of the cap and left marks. There was hair on its arms, disturbed the dust and the dirt. The guys I was hunting with said a bear took it. How many bears could open the cap, walk away with a 100-pound doe, and leave no drag marks or evidence? One Saturday after deer season ended, I was driving at night about 10 p.m. I came across a 6-inch tree across the road that was just wide enough for one truck. I had been there for a few hours before in the daylight. I got out to move, but the tree had been twisted around 5 feet off the ground and bent over the road. As I looked at it, it felt like I was being watched. I just had a feeling of impending doom sweep over me. Whatever was out there, it didn't want me there. So I jumped in my truck and quickly got the hell out of there. I'm never going to stop what I love to do most, which is hunting and fishing, but it's just not the same as it once was. You know for sure you're not alone out there. There's something about knowing that you're not the top dog in the woods. They walk around my house at night in the summer. When I'm out hunting, they're here, and no one wants to admit it. The BFRO idiots were more concerned with having me pay $400 to get in on their freaking expedition than coming up to see the area where I live. As soon as I said they were human-like and not ape-like, they just dismissed me like I never existed. And since they aren't interested, I try and get my story out wherever I can. Thanks for reading. Signed, Jack. And there it is. Real Bigfoot encounter stories from real people. What did you think about these encounters? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. But I ask, please be respectful. Some of these experiences have impacted the lives of those who shared them, and in all probability, they will read the comments. And I want to give them the respect they deserve for being brave enough to share their stories. And if you have an encounter or experience that you'd like to share, please just send it to the email in the description, and your story may just end up in a future video. So anyways, thanks so much for watching. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.